Zoe Hastings was born on November 21, 1996, in Kansas. She was the oldest of 5 children, with 3 younger sisters and a brother. Zoe was always there to help her parents look after her siblings, ready to cancel any plans if her parents needed a hand. Her mom and dad were deeply religious, so the family spent a lot of time at church. At some point, they moved to Dallas, where Zoe enrolled in a high school with a focus on creativity and arts. She had a passion for drawing and also enjoyed participating in school theatrical performances. In her spare time, Zoe worked at an art studio in Dallas. She also worked as a lifeguard at a local pool during a summer break. After graduating from high school, Zoe had the opportunity to attend some of the top universities in the country. However, she chose to postpone her education and dedicate some time to her church. In October 2015, when Zoe was 18, she was getting ready to go on a mission trip for her church and was eagerly anticipating the journey. On Sunday, October 11th, she planned to attend the Sunday service, where they would discuss some details of their upcoming trip. Zoe took the family minivan, promised her parents she'd be back for dinner, and left her house around 4:40 p.m. The church was only a few miles away, and her parents expected her to return around 6:30 p.m. However, as time passed, Zoe didn't come back for dinner, which was quite unusual. They sent her several messages, but there was no response. They also tried calling her again with no luck. After some time, they started calling her friends and family members, thinking Zoe might have visited someone after the service. But none of them had seen her that evening. Finally, her parents decided to call the church. And here, they encountered a rather unexpected turn of events. Zoe never showed up there. Her parents became even more worried and decided to contact the police. Such behavior was extremely unusual for their daughter. She always told them where she was going and never disappeared without any explanation. They called 911, but for some reason, the officers didn't come to their house to take a missing person report. So the parents drove to the police station themselves, filed a report, and began searching for their daughter. They retraced the entire route from home to the church several times but couldn't find any trace of Zoe. This went on almost all night, and as morning approached, her mother suddenly had an idea. She recalled that her daughter had an iPhone tracking app, which gave them access to her location. They discovered that her phone was just a few hundred yards from the church, near a small creek across the road from it. The parents immediately went to that spot. To their horror, they saw a lot of police cars, as well as an ambulance and emergency services. Approaching one of the officers, they explained they were searching for their daughter, and the officer informed them that there had been a car accident. A few hours earlier, the police received a call from a person who was walking his dog. At one point, a man approached him, said that there had been a car accident near the creek, and a woman was injured. They both ran to the scene, where the witness found this woman in a pool of blood and called 911. The police quickly identified the deceased. It was Zoe Hastings, but they immediately realized that she hadn't died as a result of the accident. It was obvious from the first look that she had been a victim of murder. Zoe lay on the ground a few hundred yards from the minivan, which was partially submerged in the creek. There was a lot of blood near her body, and police officers noticed multiple cuts on her neck. Zoe's dress was pulled up, and her underwear was rolled down, leading detectives to assume that the killer likely assaulted her. Zoe's parents tried to approach their daughter, but the officers stopped them, saying they shouldn't witness such a gruesome scene. While investigating the crime scene, officers found several clues. All the minivan doors, except the driver's, were locked. This could indicate that the perpetrator either drove the vehicle themselves or approached Zoe directly at the scene. A few yards from the creek, near an embankment under the bridge, police found a blood-covered knife, which was likely used as the murder weapon. Zoe's smartphone helped investigators establish the timeline of events. GPS data revealed that she arrived at the creek at 5:01 p.m., just 20 minutes after leaving home. And apparently, she was killed within minutes of that moment. Police also found out that after leaving home, Zoe made one stop. She went to a DVD rental service near her local Walgreens to return a movie. While experts examined the victim's body and all the available evidence, detectives decided to look for potential witnesses who were at the store or nearby at the same time as Zoe. After speaking with dozens of people, they managed to find 2 potential witnesses. The first was Lester Clark, who worked at a tattoo parlor next to the store. On that day, around 4:45 p.m., he went to buy cigarettes and saw a woman near the DVD rental service. Shortly after, Lester saw her returning to the parking lot and approaching a white minivan. She tried to open the door, but at that moment, a man got into the driver's seat, and they drove away. Detectives showed Lester a photo of Zoe, and he said that the woman did indeed resemble her. Despite finding the scene quite tense, he didn't think much of it as nothing obviously bad seemed to happen. The witness also provided a description of the man. He was short, heavily built, and African American. Lester was standing at a considerable distance from the parking lot, so he couldn't make out any other features. Later, as it was getting dark, he noticed the same man again walking toward the store alone. The second witness was a homeless man named Gary Whitman, who shared a similar story. Around 4:45 p.m., when he was across the street from the parking lot, he saw a woman heading toward the white minivan. Suddenly, a man approached her from behind, preventing her from getting into the car. He then took something out of his pocket and showed it to the woman. After that, she got into the car, moved to the passenger seat, while the man got into the driver's seat and drove away. Gary provided a similar description of the suspect and added that the situation struck him as highly suspicious. He went into the store and asked the clerk to call 911. However, it's unclear if the clerk complied with his request, as police found no records of this call. While investigators interviewed witnesses, experts made several discoveries. The forensic pathologist examined the victim's body and found traces of male semen, but the amount was so small that conducting a full DNA analysis was simply impossible. This only confirmed that the perpetrator had sexually assaulted the victim before the murder. Investigators also examined the victim's car and couldn't find any foreign fingerprints on either the doors or the steering wheel. Based on witness statements, the suspect could have driven Zoe away from the store parking lot in her minivan, which caught the detectives off guard. However, they didn't rule out the possibility that the killer may have simply wiped down the steering wheel and door handle after the murder. Several hairs were also found on Zoe's body, but experts couldn't extract a full DNA sample from them as they were too small. But when they examined the knife found near the crime scene, they finally had a breakthrough. A DNA sample was discovered on it, which was immediately uploaded to the FBI database, and police got a match. The sample belonged to 34-year-old Antonio Cochran. The man had a lengthy criminal history dating back to his teenage years. He had been arrested for thefts, assaults, home invasions, and was also suspected of numerous other crimes. The year before these events, in 2014, a 17-year-old daughter of his girlfriend accused Antonio of sexual assault. According to her, he offered her a ride, but once she was in the car, Antonio took her to a wooded area, threatening to kill her if she tried to escape. There, he assaulted her and the man was arrested. He claimed they had consensual sex, and the case went to court. However, during the trial, the prosecution couldn't provide enough evidence to prove his guilt, so Antonio was found not guilty. With his DNA found on the knife, police identified Antonio as the prime suspect, and he was arrested. During the interrogation, he repeatedly denied any involvement in the murder, so the detectives focused their efforts on finding more evidence. The experts took a DNA sample from Antonio and tried to compare it with the hairs and semen found on the victim's body. Since both pieces of evidence were too small to extract a full sample, experts decided to try a different type of analysis. They were able to generate an approximate profile and determine if it definitely did not match the chosen DNA. In other words, this method operates on the principle of exclusion, but it does not yield any precise results and cannot be used as proof of guilt. They compared these partial profiles from the hair and semen with the suspect's DNA and concluded that their similarity couldn't be excluded. Meanwhile, detectives examined Antonio's smartphone and found several interesting text messages. Putting them together, it became clear that on the day of the murder, he was in a very troubled state of mind. At 1:48 a.m., the day before Zoe's death, he texted a friend he lived with, saying he was moving out and he would never see him again. On the next day, at 2:07 p.m., he texted his ex-girlfriend, telling her that his stepmother had died. He mentioned she died right in front of him, and he was finding it difficult to cope with the loss. Over the next hour, Antonio texted another woman twice, stating he had been drinking all night, driving around the city, and crying. These were his final messages before Zoe's death. Later that evening, at 9:30 p.m., he texted his friend again, expressing confusion about what to do with his life and how things had recently taken a turn for the worse. The next day, he sent another message to his ex-girlfriend, saying his life was over, and she would soon find out why. Examining his browser search history, detectives found that Antonio had visited local news websites over 30 times before his arrest, specifically checking the crime sections. 5 of those visits were directly related to articles about Zoe's murder. They also noticed that prior to her death, he hardly ever visited news sites. Police only found one page in his history related to gang activity. Antonio's smartphone gave the detectives another lead. Experts obtained GPS data from his cell phone provider and discovered that at 4:34 p.m., his phone connected to a tower covering the area where the store was located. This coincided with the time Zoe was there. But this data wasn't considered strong evidence. It only indicated that his phone was within a few miles of the tower. Nevertheless, it suggested that Antonio arrived in the area just minutes before Zoe left the parking lot. His home was quite far, and throughout the day, his phone had been connected to a different nearby tower. Detectives also learned that Antonio had started a new job at a grocery store just 3 days before the incident. On Monday, the day after the murder, he didn't show up for his shift without giving any explanation. Despite the extensive list of circumstantial evidence against Antonio, the only strong evidence remained the suspect's DNA on the handle of the knife. However, this could have posed a problem, as such evidence alone is often insufficient for a conviction because merely holding a knife doesn't prove the act of murder. For instance, he could have used the knife under different circumstances, and someone else might have used it to commit the crime. But detectives couldn't find any other evidence, so they decided to proceed with the case and take it to court. The prosecution presented its version of what happened that day. When Zoe returned to the parking lot to her car, Antonio approached her, pulled out a knife from his pocket, and threatened her to get in the car. He then took the driver's seat himself and drove away. Based on messages sent by the suspect before the murder, he was in a distressed emotional state due to the death of a relative and had consumed a significant amount of alcohol. According to the investigator's version, he decided to abduct the victim with the intention of assaulting her. He chose Zoe randomly because she happened to be in the parking lot at that moment, and Antonio simply saw an opportunity to commit the crime. The man drove her to a nearby creek nestled in a low-lying area surrounded by trees, making it difficult to see from any direction. There, he forced the victim out of the car, assaulted her, and inflicted 6 stab wounds to her neck area. He then got back into the car and attempted to drive it into the creek, possibly to conceal any remaining evidence in the vehicle. However, the car only partially submerged in the water, so Antonio could have wiped the steering wheel and door handle clean of his fingerprints and fled the scene. According to the testimony of the first witness, he saw a similar-looking man returning to the store's parking lot on foot that evening. The defense argued that the majority of the evidence could hardly be considered even circumstantial. For instance, the partial analysis of hair and semen only indicated that Antonio couldn't be excluded as the source of these samples but didn't conclusively prove his involvement. Regarding the DNA on the knife, the defense seized upon the fact that this evidence alone didn't establish the fact of the murder. According to their version, Antonio could have come into contact with the knife under different circumstances. Before working at the store, he had a job at a movie theater where he sometimes had to collect various items left behind by visitors, including knives. But no evidence was found to support this version. Moreover, if someone else had taken the knife from the theater and used it to commit the murder, they would have had to somehow avoid erasing Antonio's DNA from the handle, which would have been quite a challenging task. The defense also attempted to challenge the credibility of the second witness, the homeless man Gary. It turned out that he had an active arrest warrant in his name for violating the conditions of his parole. The defense tried to use this fact to exclude his testimony from the case files, but the prosecution objected. In their view, the fact that a person with an active arrest warrant voluntarily came into contact with the police indicated that he genuinely wanted to help. Gary himself stated that he was just trying to do the right thing, knowing that he would be arrested because of it. Antonio's lawyers also tried to convince the jury that at the time of Zoe's murder, their client was elsewhere helping a friend, but no substantial evidence supporting this version was presented. Initially, the prosecution sought the death penalty for Antonio, but during the trial, it became clear that with the available evidence, this would be highly problematic. Therefore, they abandoned these plans. After prolonged deliberation, the jurors eventually found Antonio guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Zoe's parents thanked the investigators and all the participants in the trial for achieving justice for their daughter. Her father also shared that from a young age, he had warned all his children about the dangers the world might pose to them. He had exerted all his efforts to protect them, but his eldest daughter was abducted just a few hundred yards from their home, and he couldn't do anything to prevent it. Monday, September 14, 2015, was remembered by 16-year-old Nolan Buchanan as the best day of his life. The day before, he had spent Sunday with his girlfriend. a traditional morning mass with his girlfriend's family, followed by a get-together with friends and a wonderfully romantic evening. Waking up on Monday morning next to his favorite girl, the teenager felt like a free, successful, and influential businessman before whom the whole world is open. After all, he was now the owner of Buchanan Construction. The young man was going to inherit cars, a house, land, monetary assets, and made plans how he would manage the family business alone, and certainly do it better than his father who brought the company to bankruptcy. It would seem that what could go wrong? Already on October 1, 2015, Nolan Keith Buchanan was arrested at Bonita High School in Bonita, California by the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. Nolan was incarcerated at the Juvenile Treatment Center, JTC, in South Lake Tahoe until June 13, 2018, when an El Dorado County jury of 7 men and 5 women found Buchanan guilty of 3 charges. The jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. The young man was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole from the 25th year of his sentence. This is how his plan to take over the family business ended. Neighbors and classmates spoke of Nolan as a model kid and a good student. As far as I know, he was a good kid, Anita High School student Campbell Ruxton would later say in an interview. He always cared about school. He seemed very kind. He was very nice. I'm even surprised he was arrested. But what really happened in the Buchanan family? Let's break down this horrific case in detail. Molly first met Adam Buchanan when she came to apply for a job at his firm as an office manager. By the time they met, Adam was already divorced and raising his son Nolan from a previous marriage on his own. Cheerful, sociable, and cheerful blonde immediately attracted the attention of the owner of the company. The interest was mutual. Molly fell in love, started a romance that turned into a serious relationship. In her move to Adam, Molly dreamed of a real, loving, friendly family and tried to build a wonderful relationship with her stepson. Soon, she became pregnant. Gavin was born. People who knew the Buchanans claimed that they were a fairly close-knit family of 4. The head of the family, who owned a construction company, earned enough to ensure a comfortable life, and the family even purchased vacation property in El Dorado County, California. A small cabin sat on 19 acres in Greenwood, a rustic cabin with no electricity, water, sewer, or gas. Adam, who worked in construction, took an active role in remodeling the house, and the family began to visit there often. On September 13, 2015 at 10 a.m., members of the Garden Valley Fire Department responded to a wildfire in Greenwood Township in western El Dorado County on Highway 193 between Cool and Georgetown. Upon arrival, they found the fire had destroyed 10 acres of the property. A cabin located on the property was still smoldering but had burned to the ground. The fire department personnel observed charred remains in the ashes. The scene of the fire was not touched, and at 11 a.m., firefighters called the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. No one had yet realized what was at the scene. Firefighters were almost certain that the victim of the wildfire was a pet trapped in the house. The arriving coroner was faced with a daunting task. The remains of the house were still smoldering, and there was no way to examine the inside of the house. They had to wait for the flames to finally die down and for the temperature to drop slightly. As the coroner examined the house, he smelled the sweet odor of burnt flesh and later discovered a human skull and a burned chest. It appeared that the tragedy had claimed someone's life. The officer requested backup. Officers from the sheriff's office arrived and conducted a thorough examination of the scene. The conclusion was obvious. The small, secluded, and remote cabin was not the primary residence of its owners. Rather, it was most likely a country cabin where people came to vacation. A Dodge truck and trailer were found on the property adjacent to the cabin. It was possible to run the license plates and find out who the car belonged to. The owner may have been the victim of the wildfire. It didn't take long to find out that the vehicle and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, a company owned by a man named Adam Buchanan. The man in question lived 160 miles from the scene of the accident, about 3 hours away in Bonita, California. This information confirmed the assumption of the police, who decided that the house was just a country residence for those who vacation here from the hustle and bustle of the city. It remained to be seen who was inside, Mr. Buchanan himself or someone else. The name of the owner of the company gave the detectives their first clue with which they began their investigation. The Bonita police officers were tasked with checking to see if all of Buchanan's family members were well and at home. They went to the correct address and were soon in the Buchanan's driveway, where they noticed a white Ford pickup truck. At a knock on the door, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage came out. He greeted the uniformed officers with surprise and asked what brought them to him. The officers decided to first find out who was in the house so as not to frighten the household. Perhaps the company car had been taken by someone from the company and not the owner himself. Nolan Buchanan said his father, Adam, had gone away for the weekend to his country estate, 160 miles away, with Molly and their 8-year-old son, Gavin, and they were due back in the evening. According to him, his father had left him to look after the house. Investigators did not yet have sufficient reason to believe the remains in the cabin were those of the Buchanans, but the information received and the discovery of the remains believed to be those of two people, by the evening of September 13th, was enough to report the family missing in the El Dorado County fire. The next day, September 14th, El Dorado County Police went to Nolan's home to talk to him more thoroughly and try to figure out whose lives the fire had claimed. Officers were met by Adam's parents, Howard and Susan Buchanan. They said that their son, the owner of the burned-out cabin, does his own home repairs and therefore travels there very often. The parents were very concerned as they had not been able to contact their son or daughter-in-law until now. From the story, the officers learned that the house is connected to generators. But at the time of the tragedy, it had no electricity. There were, however, gas cylinders inside. This gave two theories. The fire could have been either accidental or intentional. By September 15th, the fire scene had cooled down, and investigators were finally able to collect evidence, including debris from a nearby fire pit. According to Denton James Peterson of the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, new remains were discovered that changed the direction of the case. Police found a piece of skull with a bullet hole. At that point, we all realized that there was actually a homicide. This was not an accidental fire, reported the sheriff. The remains were collected and sent for forensic DNA testing. In the first set of remains, the bullet was lodged in the victim's thigh. The skull with the bullet hole, judging by its size, belonged to a child. The version of fatal accident dropped by itself. The version of murder came to the forefront. No one now doubted that the fire was a means of destroying the traces of the crime. It remained to find out under what circumstances the crime had taken place. Was it a burglary that had gone wrong? Or had the family taken their lives deliberately? But then by whom and why? Or could the crime be related to Buchanan Construction, a company where Adam Buchanan was president and chief operating officer, and someone harbored a grudge against him due to a working relationship? Initially, investigators focused specifically on the latter theory. They also looked into Molly's life to determine if she had any enemies capable of the crime. Once those lines of inquiry stalled, officers turned their attention to problems in Molly and Adam's marriage. There proved to be plenty of them. Investigators learned that over time, Molly and Adam's relationship began to deteriorate, and at the time of the crime, they had been sleeping apart for quite some time. A diary was found in which Molly described abuse from Adam. Witnesses interviewed described rough treatment and abuse. According to them, Adam was rude not only to Molly but also to the children. Molly's mother, Susie Slankard, admitted to investigators, "There were times when I was afraid they would kill each other in one of their arguments." Molly did not sever her relationship with Adam, but would periodically take her son and leave to go to her parents' house and return a few days later until the next fight. It also turned out that the couple liked to hunt in the area where their country house was located. Since everyone was armed, the investigators assumed that during another quarrel, one of the spouses grabbed a gun and shot. And when he realized what he had done, he took his own life. However, there was an inconsistency. If the tragedy happened because of a conflict between husband and wife, it means that near the remains of one of them must necessarily be the instrument of crime, which, however, was not. Investigators speculated that the weapon may have been damaged in the fire and may not have looked as obvious as expected. Over the course of 5 days, forensic team members took turns removing ashes from the home. The search was conducted with surgical thoroughness, but did not yield the expected result. No weapons were found in the house. By this time came the data of forensic examination. The examination confirmed that the DNA of the bodies belonged to Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds before the fire, and the angle of the bullet wounds ruled out the version that someone took their own life. The lack of firearms meant that someone else was in the house. A 4th person who shot the Buchanans, and the investigation had to start over. Police had no choice but to turn to the 16-year-old son of the deceased. Nolan told officers that the family drove away in an old Dodge truck. According to the son, his father decided to use the company vehicle rather than his personal Ford, which was parked in the driveway because he had loaded the truck and trailer with rocks that he was going to decorate the area near his country cabin. It was this truck that police found near the burn structure. When asked why Nolan did not go on vacation with his relatives, the young man, as in the first interview, said that he had a duty to look after the house and garden during the absence of his father and stepmother. Nolan also said that they had a neighbor growing forbidden grass on the edge of the Buchanan property, which caused his father to have frequent arguments with this neighbor, demanding that he stop planting the grass and threatening to go to the police. Talking about the family business, Nolan told of the company's financial difficulties. Things were not going well. The company was undergoing downsizing, and the number of employees was down to 5. From what his father said, the debts associated with the business were increasing rapidly. So now the investigation had a lot of useful information, and the detectives had a suspect, a neighbor, especially since in that area, violent crime was often linked to the cultivation of illegal herbs. Detectives felt that the threat of going to the police could have led to the murder of Buchanan and his family. The problem was no one had any idea which neighbor they were talking about. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing all the homeowners in a row. The tactic was successful. They found a man who confirmed the story of a quarrel with Adam over growing a forbidden crop. But according to him, after a sharp conversation, the conflict was over. The neighbor had an alibi and another version turned out to be untenable. What remained to be dealt with was the financial crisis that had hit the family's business. On September 18th, the police visited Adam's company and interviewed the employees. Nolan's words were true. The company was in a sorry state. It was threatened with bankruptcy as the amount of debts exceeded $30,000. Because of this, some employees were fired. It turned out that some of the former employees were extremely dissatisfied with the reduction and therefore could be involved in the crime. And that's where investigators got lucky. Over the weekend, the local high school organized a community cleanup day. The students were clearing debris from a business park just a mile from Adam's construction company. It was there on September 19th that a small purse with a wallet and identification cards belonging to Molly McAfee and Adam Buchanan was found under one of the bushes. A .22 caliber rifle was lying nearby. Detectives immediately went to the scene of the discovery. The county sheriff's office made a new assumption. The perpetrator had massacred the Buchanan family with the found rifle and, covering his tracks, had taken their documents from the crime scene. The discovery was important because it meant that someone had traveled all the way to Greenwood to kill the family and then returned to Bonita to dispose of the bag and murder weapon. It appeared to be a Bonita resident. The proximity of the evidence found to the location of Buchanan construction strengthened the theory that the boss was massacred by one of the disgruntled employees. Detectives sent the firearm and the bag of documents for examination, requesting a warrant to inspect the company's records and premises. Here, the investigators got lucky a second time. During the search, they gained access to a video surveillance camera installed on the firm's premises. By happy coincidence, the lens of the camera was directed not at the company's territory, but at the center of the parking lot. After this discovery, the case was just days away from being solved. Since it was already known that the family had gone out of town on Friday, investigators reviewed Friday's footage and were surprised to find that Adam had attached a trailer filled with rocks to a Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolan had told them. Detectives realized that the young man had deliberately manipulated the investigation. If the white Ford had towed the rock trailer to the cabin, then someone must have driven it back and parked it in the driveway of the Buchanan family home. Investigators re-interviewed Nolan, trying to keep him safe while getting as many details as possible. Nolan again recounted his weekend, where he had been and who he had seen. Only this time they asked him what movie they had seen at the cinema, how he had paid for the shopping at the mall, and how he had paid for dessert on a date. The unsuspecting Nolan answered with his father's credit card. The officers then applied for a warrant to search Buchanan's home in Bonita, search the vehicles, and check financial records. The Ford automobile was still parked in the driveway. It was closely inspected, and they noticed reddish soil sticking to the wheels similar to that in Greenwood. If the Ford had been used for a trip last weekend or earlier, traces of soil might have remained, but they would not have been as obvious. Unfortunately, the fire had destroyed the wheel tread marks near the country house. But the dirt buildup indicated that the car had probably been to Greenwood recently. Detectives tracked the bank card payments and found that Adam Buchanan had used his credit card on Friday, September 11th, at fast food chain Taco Bell on his way to Greenwood. Nolan, on the other hand, claimed he stayed home, did not go with his parents, and had the credit card in his possession. Detectives went to the diner and checked the security cameras. They saw exactly what they expected, a white Ford instead of a truck. When detectives searched the Ford, they found a Taco Bell receipt dated September 11th that included not 3, but 4 drinks. Evidence collected at the scene of the fire similarly pointed to 4 drink cups. So Nolan was in the car. The next credit card transaction took place on Saturday, September 12th at the Valencia Club Bar in Penryn, about 30 minutes away from the cabin. Adam's parents had previously told detectives about the bar. They said their son and daughter-in-law liked to drop in there after renovations to the cabin. Security cameras recorded the time the couple left the bar, and traffic cameras on the highway helped track the couple's route. A Ford F-150 headed toward the Buchanan cabin around 2:30 a.m. on the day of the fire, and at 3:30 a.m., drove in the opposite direction. In the first instance, the camera captured Adam and Molly in the vehicle, and in the second, only Nolan. A few hours later, on Sunday morning, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used to pay at 3 of Benita's establishments, Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station. The bank confirmed to investigators that Buchanan had only one bank card. The facts contradicted Nolan's stories. By this time, forensic results had come back. Nolan's fingerprints were found on the gun. He was arrested right in the middle of a high school class. Nolan Buchanan pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. He attempted to distort the story and claimed that it was his father who shot the family, after which he pointed a rifle at him, and he, defending himself, took the weapon away, accidentally shooting his father. Nolan insisted it was self-defense, attributing the fire and subsequent lie to a state of panic and extreme fright. That's why he took gasoline and set the house on fire to make it look like nothing had happened there. The defense continually focused the jury's attention on Adam's abuse of his own son and other family members. The medical examiner questioned the verdict because the bullet wound mark on a piece of Gavin's skull was consistent with a shot fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. Nolan, on the other hand, claimed that his and his brother's beds were next to each other, and they were simultaneously awakened by the noise and screaming. It was at the moment of awakening that Nolan allegedly saw someone enter the bedroom and shoot Gavin. The shooter then pointed the rifle at him, and Nolan miraculously managed to push the attacker away. Under this scenario, the shot would have been fired at about a 45-degree angle, which was inconsistent with forensic evidence. The prosecution came to believe that Nolan shot his brother when they were alone in the house while their parents spent time at a bar. After waiting for his father and stepmother to return, Nolan shot them as well. Judging by where the bodies were found, Adam was killed first, followed by Molly. Nolan then took the rifle, his parents' papers, doused the bodies with gasoline, and set the house on fire. Then he went home, met his girlfriend, and spent the day with her, creating an alibi for himself. On July 13, 2018, a jury found Nolan guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. As a result, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Judge Kingsbury, in announcing the sentence, reflected on the verbal and physical abuse Nolan faced on the testimony that Nolan massacred his brother because he didn't want him to go through the same horror or be forced to live with what his father had already managed to do to him. But as she did, she also listed facts about the premeditation of the crime and subsequent arson, the creation of alibis, and the plans to run the family business that Nolan had voiced to family members. The judge cited a failure to follow rules and deviant behavior noted by staff at the South Lake Tahoe Juvenile Treatment Center, where Nolan went after his arrest. "Everyone has the opportunity to change," Judge Kingsbury told Nolan. "I hope you will do everything in your power to do so. If you behave well, you will have a chance to get out on parole in 25 years under the Senate bill and Supreme Court rulings. It's up to you whether you take that chance or not." Nolan continues to insist he is innocent. If he ever gets out on parole, he will have to pay a huge compensation to the victims. The amount of the payout is unknown at this time. The story we're sharing is about the Vier Miller case. Bruce Miller was truly a kind man who carried the full weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He worked tirelessly, often without rest, to support his family, never holding back. His life was dedicated to making his wife happy. He was her supporter, her protector, and her source of stability. But in a cruel twist of fate, instead of being rewarded for his dedication and love, he became the victim of a ruthless crime. Bruce fell prey to the dark side of the internet. His feelings for Sherry grew after he hired her and helped raise 3 children with her. They eventually fell in love 2 years later, and this emotion completely consumed him. Bruce decided to adopt her children to create a united family and home for them all together. However, Sherry concealed her true intentions. While Bruce believed in their bright future together, she led a double life and deceived him. The computer Bruce bought for Sherry turned out to be more than just a gift. It became an instrument in her dreadful scheme. Instead of using it for business growth, she used it to plan his murder. Sherry came to realize that divorce wouldn't bring her desired wealth, and so she resorted to drastic measures by manipulating Bruce's feelings and using him as an instrument in her cruel plot. This case could be seen as one of its kind, a pioneering example where online interactions played a critical role in criminal activity. Perhaps this marked one of the first instances when internet communication became pivotal in legal proceedings. A fascinating development indeed. In today's era, such cases are increasingly common compared to times when the internet was nascent and people were unaware that everything they did online could be tracked or restored. Sherry, like many others at that time, had no idea that deleted messages could be recovered later on. It also highlighted how dangerous it is chatting with strangers online and just how much one's life can change due to this form of communication. There are always individuals who find themselves unexpectedly at center stage, plunged into a world full of mystery and intrigue, and Bruce surely counted among those people. A person whose story is packed with secrets and unexpected turns. Born on July 26, 1951, in Flint, Michigan, during his younger years, Bruce worked as a mechanic at a General Motors factory but later changed course, opening his own business, a salvage yard dealing in cars and reselling spare parts. Despite handling large cash sums and dealing with different social groups, he was still known as a generous, kind-hearted individual, though he sometimes even bent the law by falsifying license plates, though this was rarely done. He didn't have many romantic relationships. He followed marriages, both ending in divorce, finally meeting the fate bringing his final love, Sherry Miller. Sherry often displayed unusual habits and behavior, according to her friends. She would act as if she were creating a new identity on the internet while engaging in flirtatious conversations with strangers. People's opinions were divided. Some believed Bruce was aware of it but chose to ignore it, finding it easier to maintain the status quo. Bruce valued his marriage and cherished the stability provided by Sherry, along with his efforts to adopt her 3 children. Sherry also aimed to preserve their marital bond. She had affection for Bruce and appreciated the appealing lifestyle he offered, even after she had misused his credit cards shortly following their wedding. This did not perturb Bruce much. Their relationship was as volatile as Sherry's personal life itself. They maintained a working routine during the day and spent intimate moments at night. Amid this familial bliss, Sherry's online alter ego began to emerge alongside her growing confidence. Her chat interactions became increasingly explicit, often focusing on sexual topics with various men under different aliases such as Horny 24 to 21, Love Me Slowly, and I Want to Be Seduced. Rather than sticking with consistent contacts, she preferred engaging with new individuals once boredom set in, initiating cycles of flirting anew each time. As per her own explanation, these interactions were mere playful engagements, a game wherein each new man represented another level of progress that boosted her sense of invincibility. This detached mentality eventually led Sherry down a detrimental path. Amidst her frequent online activities, Sherry encountered Jerry Cassidy, a former police officer residing in Reno, Nevada, and they quickly developed romantic feelings for each other. It seemed Jerry held a special place for Sherry in contrast to previous online acquaintances. Eventually, they even renamed their accounts, Sherry adopting Jerry's Fool, while Jerry took on Sherry's Fool. Their digital exchanges encompassed everything from casual texting and flirting to sharing nude photographs and exchanging sexually suggestive messages and videos featuring explicit content involving Sherry herself. One must remember that all these exchanges took place back in 1999 when executing such actions involved significantly more complexity compared to today's technological advancements. Jerry was born on October 6, 1960, in Kansas City, Missouri. From a young age, he was passionate about hunting and harbored dreams of joining the FBI. He planned to achieve this by starting with the Montana Police. Jerry served as a detective in the homicide department for 9 years, eventually rising to the rank of lieutenant. However, by the end of his tenure, things took a troubling turn. While investigating one case, Jerry uncovered several fraudulent documents within the department. It was clearly an inside job. Acting responsibly, he reported these findings to his superior. Unfortunately, word got out among his colleagues. They branded him a snitch and ostracized him, jeopardizing his career. The situation escalated until it became evident that he was no longer welcome there. After being demoted, Jerry chose to resign from his position in 1994. This had a profoundly negative impact on him. Consequently, he began struggling with alcohol and substance addiction while also battling depression. Not long after these events unfolded, Jerry's wife divorced him. This divorce further affected him, as it resulted in him losing visitation rights with their son. Despite these setbacks, Jerry managed to reclaim some stability by taking up employment as a security officer at the Harris, Kansas City Hotel and Casino. In 1999, he relocated to Reno and found work at another casino there. During this period, Jerry met Sherry through an online platform and soon transitioned their relationship into real-life interactions. Rather than viewing the relationship as a passionate affair, Sherry started to exploit Jerry. Her influence over him became evident to those who knew him well. His observers noted that Jerry seemed to exhibit symptoms akin to bipolar disorder. He was highly enthusiastic when Sherry was around and deeply despondent in her absence. It wasn't long before Sherry began her deceitful manipulations. In September, she falsely declared that she was pregnant with Jerry's child. Shortly after, she claimed that she had miscarried due to Bruce allegedly beating her, though this was entirely untrue. Bruce, in reality, was a diligent family man and not the dangerous individual Sherry depicted him as. Jerry, unaware of the truth, became exceedingly angry. Losing his supposed unborn child and believing Sherry was subjected to violence were unbearable for him. A lot for anyone. Concurrently, Sherry dissuaded Jerry from confronting Bruce by claiming Bruce had significant influential connections and substantial wealth that would ensure they faced retribution if they acted against him. Just 1 month later, Sherry fabricated another story about being pregnant with twins. One crucial detail is that in 1995, Sherry underwent a tubal ligation procedure, which rendered her unable to conceive, but she never disclosed this information to Jerry. This shocking disclosure underscores the extent of deception involved in their relationship. On November 5, 1999, Jerry received a disturbing email that was purportedly from Bruce. The message stated that Sherry was gaining weight due to the 2 unborn children she was carrying and expressed her desire for an abortion to lose the extra pounds. Jerry, filled with anxiety, attempted to reach out to Sherry. He could only manage a brief text conversation in which she mentioned needing to leave for a few days. The following day brought another message, supposedly from Bruce. This time it informed Jerry that Sherry would be returning home soon and implied that the abortion had been completed successfully. However, it also indicated that Sherry would no longer be able to conceive. Enclosed in this communication was a staged photograph showing Sherry covered in bruises. Jerry experienced overwhelming rage. He contacted Sherry the next day, and they concluded that the only solution was to eliminate Bruce. They meticulously planned their approach, routes, a parking spot, and the best location and time for executing their plan at the yard. Driven by his mounting anger, Jerry departed from his home towards Michigan that same evening. As Bruce prepared to leave work later, he received a call from Sherry asking him if he could pick up pizza on his way back, a distraction integral to their plot. Engaged in this phone conversation, Bruce did not notice when Jerry approached him from behind and pointed a .20 caliber gun at him before pulling the trigger. Having committed the crime, Jerry returned home while Sherry set into motion their next phase of cover-up activities. She contacted Bruce's brother, Chuck, expressing concern about Bruce's failure to return home yet. Subsequently, alarmed by her worry, which she feigned, Chuck and his wife rushed over to investigate at the yard where they discovered Bruce's body with horror before dialing authorities. The authorities first suspected a robbery. Bruce's old friend, John Hutchinson, was their primary suspect right away. John owed his employer over $5,000 and had previously been involved with Shaw. His alibi was weak and he failed the polygraph test. No surprise, the police had their doubts about him. Consequently, John was detained for questioning, but due to insufficient evidence, he was eventually released. Subsequently, the case went cold. Officers initially deemed Sherry's behavior after her husband's death appropriate. They were unaware of what she concealed at the time. Shortly thereafter, she was seen enjoying parties frequently. Moreover, she swiftly secured an insurance payout, sold off the business, and withdrew funds from family accounts, thus becoming wealthy overnight. Amidst her festivities and expenditures, she invited her new partner to reside in the house formerly shared with Bruce. Jerry and Sherry's relationship fell apart abruptly after Bruce's death. That was when Jerry discovered Sherry had fallen for another man. He started to feel immense guilt and reflected on the dreadful crime he had committed alongside her. Having worked for the police for many years, Jerry quickly discerned that he was merely a pawn in Sherry's scheme. She manipulated his emotions to eliminate her husband. It dawned on him that Bruce was truly an innocent man. None of the accusations Sherry had fabricated involved abuse, affiliations, beatings, or children. Even the pictures presented as evidence were dated 1994. 3 months later, on February 11th, Jerry Cassidy chose to end his life. He was found alone in the apartment he rented from his cousin with a .22 caliber rifle beside him. Among his belongings were letters to his family and a note and a briefcase addressed to his lawyer, John O'Connor. When John opened the briefcase, he discovered clear evidence of a crime that sealed Sherry's fate. In addition to various pieces of evidence unearthed after Jerry's death, there was also a note where Jerry confessed to killing Bruce and placed all blame squarely on Sherry. The note outlined how all available evidence would be handed over to the police. Jerry expressed deep regret and acknowledged his foolishness in being manipulated by Sherry into committing such an act. He revealed that everyone would now understand why he descended into depression. He had been unable to reveal the truth until now. Jerry also claimed that Sherry aimed solely at securing money and eliminating her husband. She succeeded in her goal but disregarded the harm caused along the way. Following this startling revelation, authorities swiftly apprehended Sherry and charged her with second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The trial commenced 10 months later on December 12th. Given the nature of her internet-related crime, public curiosity was exceptionally high. Sherry pleaded not guilty during the proceedings, and her defense attorney suggested that Jerry had fabricated his evidence against her out of guilt. They also attempted to shift the blame back onto JN. During the trial, disturbing messages between Sherry and JN were presented, wherein they discussed using a firearm. It was highlighted that a day after her husband's death, she altered her first name, last name, and address. After Jerry's demise, she repeated this action. The case concluded successfully in court, and after only 2 days of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Sherry Miller was found guilty of second-degree murder, and on January 9, 2001, she received a life sentence in prison. However, several complaints arose from the defense regarding the trial. One notable issue questioned the admissibility of Jerry's letter as evidence. This concern led to such significant implications that 7 years later in 2008, a judge ordered a retrial for the case. Consequently, as per federal court decisions, Sherry was released from prison in July 2009 until further trials could be conducted. For over 3 years, she walked free without restrictions, even accessing internet and dating sites. However, many individuals, especially Bruce's and Jerry's families, opposed this release, deeming it due to an absurd technicality. Back in August 2012, the district court reversed its decision, and Sherry returned to prison, where she has remained since. While she was at large, Sherry successfully reconnected with her children. This reconnection had a notably positive impact on her. In April 2016, she wrote a letter admitting guilt despite previously denying it. She explained that her initial denial stemmed from fear that an admission would hinder her chances of appealing for a retrial. Her attorneys had advised such action. However, they later denied this claim. They asserted that if they had known about her guilt earlier, they would have recommended pursuing a plea deal. Under such circumstances, Sherry would have faced only 15 years of imprisonment, as opposed to the longer term she is currently serving. By then, Sherry had already spent 2 decades behind bars. Notably, during this time, she entered into her 4th marriage with Michael Denoy. Michael learned about her story through media reports and became interested in her situation, eventually proposing during their first meeting. California is a state that needs little introduction. With a population of almost 40 million people, many travel from far and wide to visit the Golden State. Home to glitz and glamour, golden beaches and gorgeous scenery, Silicon Valley and the Hollywood elite. But like most places, California is definitely not without a darker side. Today, we are looking at a series of appalling crimes spanning across 15 years, and only reaching a conclusion in 2021. This is the story of the Hollywood Ripper. This story covers almost 2 decades and actually begins in 1993. But sometimes you first must go forwards in order to work backwards. We'll begin today's episode in 2001 in Los Angeles, California. One person that called this place home was 22-year-old Ashley Ellerin, an up-and-coming fashion student. Finding her way in the hustle and bustle of LA, she was feisty and fearless, and everybody said she was career-focused and determined to be a success. After gaining a place at the Los Angeles Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, she started taking extra classes at UCLA and got a part-time job as a dancer out in Vegas. Ashley was working long hours every single day, carving out her own path in the busy city. She was sharing a bungalow with some friends on a nice little street in an idyllic location, just a short walk away from the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Given her job and the social circle she was running in because of her fashion work, Ashley soon started catching the eye of big Hollywood stars. She briefly dated Vin Diesel and was also romantically linked to Law and Order's Jeremy Sisto, who even flew Ashley over to one of his film sets. In December 2000, she started talking to an actor whose star was rapidly rising in Hollywood. 23-year-old Ashton Kutcher, currently starring in the hit TV program That 70s Show and having just wrapped on the movie Dude, Where's My Car? He and Ashley had met through mutual friends and hit it off right away. February 21st, 2001 was the night of the Grammys, and Ashley was going to an after-party at a friend's house. Ashley and Ashton spoke on the phone, and the pair made plans to hang out after the party. Ashton said he would meet her at her bungalow, and they could go for dinner and drinks. Ashley spent her day catching up with her dad, who was visiting from out of town. After this, Ashley's landlord, Mark, came over to see her. It would later come out that the pair had been seeing each other on and off for a while and slept together that evening. At around 8:30 p.m., Ashton called Ashley to confirm their plans. He told her he was running behind and maybe they should just grab some drinks and pass on dinner. She said that was fine as she was just out of the shower anyway and would slowly start getting ready. At around 10:15 p.m., Ashton called Ashley again, but her phone rang out. He headed over to her bungalow anyway. The lights were on and her car was parked outside. After knocking on the door several times and getting no answer, he peered through a gap in a side window. It looked messy inside, but Ashley had told him she was in the middle of remodeling, so the mess didn't seem too out of place. He could see some red on the floor and assumed it was a glass of wine that she had spilled. As he was later than he initially told her he would be, he thought that she was simply mad at him and had either gone out or gone to bed. With this, he left. The next morning, Ashley's roommate walked into a frightening scene. Ashley was on the floor outside her bedroom in a pool of blood. She had been stabbed 47 times, with some of the wounds being almost 6 inches deep, and her head was almost severed. Her body was already turning blue, and it was clear that she had been dead for hours. The relatively quiet community was completely stunned. Ashley's death was shocking and on everybody's minds. Her family and friends gave police all the contacts and information they could. But for somebody who was as busy and popular as Ashley, detectives had a lot of names to get through. The only neighbor that could offer them anything said they thought they heard something that sounded like shouting just after 8:30 p.m., but they put it down to a party or a gathering. They hadn't seen anyone coming or going, and apart from the noise, there was nothing else that seemed noteworthy. The police started with the man she was supposed to be seeing that night, Ashton Kutcher. He told them that he was worried, as although he had nothing to do with her death, his fingerprints were on her door handle. They asked him some routine questions and he was very quickly ruled out. He was shaken and upset about what he now realized he'd seen inside, but he simply couldn't help the police any further. Another person they wanted to talk to was Ashley's landlord, given their relationship, but he was also eliminated from the investigation. The bungalow was very secure and double-gated, and as there was no sign of a forced entry, it meant that she had opened the door to her killer, which implied she potentially knew them. One of the names her friends handed over to the officers was Mike the Furnace Man. They didn't know a lot about it, just that he was someone Ashley had complained about pestering her for a while, with some of her friends saying he was creepy, always hanging around and turning up uninvited. After several months, the Los Angeles Police Department finally landed on a name, Michael Gargiulo. As detectives started trying to locate Michael to ask him some questions about his whereabouts that night and his connection to Ashley, they received a surprising call from the Cook County Sheriff's Office in Illinois. They had recently opened up a cold case from 1993 and were looking for someone currently living in Los Angeles that might be able to help them. None other than Michael Gargiulo. The LAPD could not believe what they were hearing and knew this was no coincidence. The Illinois case that was currently being investigated was the 1993 murder of Trisha Picacho, an 18-year-old who had been stabbed nearly 50 times on the steps of her family home. On the night of Friday, August 13th, Trisha met up with some friends for dinner at a TGI's. It was one of their last nights together before they all went their separate ways to various universities. That night, she and her friends stayed together until about 1 a.m. and after dropping her friends home, Trisha drove home herself. Just a few hours later, Trisha's father, Rick, found his daughter dead on the front steps of their home as he left to walk the dog. He said the first thing he saw when he stepped outside were her little tennis shoes before he fell onto his knees, screaming. She was covered in wounds and blood, and one of her arms had been broken. She was still clutching her house key in her hand. She had fought her killer hard, and there was DNA under her fingernails. But these samples would lie dormant for many years, given the fact that forensic technology was in its infancy. Trisha's parents said that she was a dream child, a straight-A student, a debate team champion, and one of the hardest working and kindest people they knew. She was set to study engineering at Purdue University and was most definitely up for any challenges life threw her way. Nobody could believe that anyone would want to hurt her in such a brutal way, and they simply had no names and no suspects. Before long, Trisha Picaccio's case went cold. Her mother Diane said that the police had told her, "Unfortunately, some cases just didn't get solved, and that's the way it was." She said, "If they thought they were going to turn up on my doorstep and tell me that I have to accept that, they knocked on the wrong door." But sadly for the family, it seemed it had just been them fighting for answers for the last 7 years until it was reopened now that forensic testing had come such a long way. The Cook County Sheriff's Office wanted samples from everybody that had been in contact with Trisha around that time. After she was found on that fateful morning, Michael Gargiulo had actually been one of the first people on the police's radar. He had admitted to driving Trisha to a friend's house 2 days before she was killed. He was also good friends with her brother Doug and a frequent face at the Picacho home. He was questioned by police in 1993, but no charges were filed. And now, almost a decade later, officers wanted to talk to him again. As soon as the murders of Ashley and Trisha were compared, the similarities in the way both women had been killed could not be overlooked. Los Angeles police now needed to find Michael even quicker. And after a few months of looking, they finally located him. The first thing they wanted was a DNA sample, but he refused, saying he had nothing to do with either case. And without a warrant, he wasn't going to hand anything over. With this, the officers had no choice but to leave. They kept tabs on Michael for a while, and when they found out he had briefly been admitted to hospital, they secretly got their DNA sample from there. After a long wait, the results finally came back. Michael Gargiulo's DNA was a positive match to the DNA found under Trisha's fingernails all those years ago. Investigators were so relieved they went straight to the attorney's office looking to seek an indictment for murder. The attorney's office, however, refused to take it any further. They said that the DNA could have been exchanged through casual contact given the fact that Michael knew Trisha and her brother from school. But according to witnesses, Trisha spent the night with many people, including her boyfriend, but the only DNA found on her was Michael's. A second blow came when the LAPD determined that they had no physical evidence tying Michael to the murder of Ashley Ellerin, and they announced that no charges would be filed there either. Detectives had been on the cusp of catching a dangerous killer, and it had slipped through their hands in an instant. But they knew that this had to be their man. They just had to go back through his history and gather as much as they could about his character, prior relationships, and previous crimes. So, who was Michael Gargiulo? And what had led to all of this? Born in 1976, Michael Thomas Gargiulo grew up in a quiet suburb of Glenview, Illinois. He was from a big family, having 7 brothers and sisters. He would tell people he suffered physical abuse at the hands of his father and of the siblings, although these claims were never corroborated. As he entered his teenage years, Michael gained a reputation as a bully with a quick and aggressive temper. He was also known to lie compulsively and exaggerate things all the time. One of his friends recalled he could go from being perfectly pleasant to almost inhuman in a split second. Michael soon started getting arrested for things like breaking into unlocked cars in his school and fighting with people. He developed a fascination with the serial killer Ted Bundy and spent countless hours deep in books about forensic science, something he soon took great pride in knowing a lot about. He told people if he ever got caught committing a crime, he would either know how to get himself out of it or he would lie until he dies. After Trisha was killed in 1993, the Picacho family started receiving gifts from Michael. A t-shirt for Rick, a restaurant voucher, and some flowers for Diane. Michael then showed up at their house asking to talk to Rick. They said it looked like he wanted to get something off his chest. He waited for him to come home for almost an hour before abruptly leaving without saying anything. Rick and Diane were so on edge after the strange encounter. They got straight on the phone and told the detectives what had happened. The police did log it, but it was never followed up on. In 1997, officers saw another chance to try and get Michael to talk about Trisha. He was charged with stealing a car, and police said if he told them what he knew about Trisha's murder, they could cut him a deal on the charges. But he still sat quiet and said nothing at all. Former girlfriends of Michael had horror stories to tell of their time with him. One said when she was 17, he handcuffed and raped her. Another one of Michael's exes said he punched her in the face so hard, she ended up with a detached retina. He threatened to kill her, saying he would be able to get away with it because of his extensive knowledge of forensics. In 1998, Michael decided he was going to go to LA to chase a dream that many share when they move there. He wanted to be an actor and a model. Michael quickly got a job as a bouncer at the Rainbow Bar and Grill on Sunset Boulevard, West Hollywood. No sooner had he been hired, he was let go for punching a customer in the face. During his brief time there, Michael made friends with two other bouncers. They said that Michael had once asked them if they'd ever killed anyone. He then admitted to murdering Trisha Picacho. Back in 1993, "I buried a bitch. I left the bitch on the steps for dead," he calmly said. With Michael's reputation as a liar, the two men assumed that this was just another one of his wild stories. In the fall of 2000, Michael met Ashley Ellerin, who at the time was living just across the street from him in Hollywood. He offered to help her change a flat tire and the pair exchanged numbers. This short encounter soon became a fatal obsession. Before long, he was trying to visit her at all hours of the day and night, sitting outside her home in his car and turning up wherever she was. Despite all of this and the DNA matches, 4 years would pass since that fateful day back in February 2001, when Ashley was found dead, and over a decade since Trisha was killed. It was now 2005 and police were still working on both cases. Although they still only had one suspect, they didn't have enough to meet the threshold of what was required to file charges. To their horror and dismay, another shocking and disturbing crime was about to take place across the city. A 32-year-old mother of 4, Maria Bruno, was starting fresh in a new apartment complex in East LA. She had recently separated from her husband, and she moved into a new place, looking forward to a new start. She told everyone she had spent a lot of time choosing the apartment and had picked it because of its security and how safe it felt for her and her young family. She had 2-year-old twins, a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. Just 10 days after moving in on December 1st, 2005, Maria was found dead by her ex-husband Irving. She had been stabbed 17 times, her throat had been slit, and both her breasts had been cut off. The only clue left at the scene was a blue surgical shoe cover with a small amount of Maria's blood on it. Whoever her killer was, they had broken in via the kitchen window at around 1 a.m. and used one of her own knives to kill her. Experts determined the killer was left-handed. Police's first thought was that Irving might have something to do with it. They had separated on bad terms after their relationship had become more volatile. But Irving said the pair were working on getting their marriage back on track and had even been out for dinner the night before. There were a couple of drops of Maria's blood found inside his car, but he said this was easily explained. While at the restaurant table, Maria cut her finger and a few employees came to help her as well, corroborating what Irving had said. After police ruled him out, they were left with nothing. One detective said it was almost like she was killed for the sake of it and they had nothing to go on, apart from hoping there was some more DNA found on the shoe cover. But a few neighbors had their eyes on another man who was living just across the courtyard from Maria at the time. He always acted and behaved oddly, but in the days and hours leading up to her death, he was acting even more strangely than usual. They gave police a description and a sketch was drawn up. The man they were describing was Michael Gargiulo. Michael was long gone by the time the investigation got underway, and another awful crime would remain unsolved for several years. It was around this time that Trisha's parents back in Illinois finally learned that there had been a hit on the DNA sample from their daughter's case. They were appalled that it had taken them so long to learn about this and that Michael was still out there, free, facing no charges. Another 3 years would pass, taking us to 2008. In an apartment complex in Santa Monica lived 26-year-old Michelle Murphy. Late one April night, Michelle woke up to a man in her bedroom wearing a hoodie and a hat. He launched at her and started stabbing her. Michelle was petite, standing at just 5'1", and before she knew it, she was fighting for her life against someone that was completely overpowering her. She grabbed the blade with both hands, trying to get him to lose control of it. She was screaming so loudly, she knew it was a matter of time before someone heard her. In the last-ditch attempt to get him off her, and with all of her remaining strength, she tucked her knees in towards her chest and pushed both legs out at him, causing him to fall off the bed. After this, her attacker ran out of the room saying, "I'm sorry." Michelle was left battered and bleeding on the bed, but she had survived. She called her boyfriend and he called for help. Her attacker was left-handed, and fortunately had been cut with the blade in the fight, leaving his blood in her apartment. Sure enough, when the Santa Monica Police Department ran the blood through the database, they got a match, and it went right back to the DNA that was found under Trisha Picacho's nails. And they also realized it matched DNA that was found along the elastic part of the blue surgical shoe cover outside Maria Bruno's apartment. Michael Gargiulo's despicable acts weren't stopping or slowing down. Far from it. And finally, with this, after 15 years, his horrific crime spree would come to an end. In June 2008, he was placed under arrest for the attempted murder of Michelle Murphy and held on a $1.1 million bail. A search of his car uncovered many items of evidentiary value, including some blue surgical shoe covers. 3 months later, Michael was also charged with the murders of both Ashley Ellerin and Maria Bruno. However, it would take until 2011 for Michael to be charged with the murder of Trisha Picacho too. Because Trisha's case had happened in Illinois and Ashley, Maria, and Michelle were all in California, it meant that Michael would have to have 2 separate trials in both states. Michael Gargiulo pleaded not guilty to all charges, and after many pushbacks due to him hiring and firing lawyers and some attempted escapes from prison, in May 2019, his California trial finally got underway. By this point, it had taken Michael longer to go to trial than any other inmates in the history of the LA County Jail. His defense team said he had suffered mental health issues and was unable to recall attacking Michelle, and it was up to a jury to decide if he was sane at the time or not. This would obviously result in a very different possible sentence, so this decision was not made lightly. A jury found Michael Gargiulo sane, and this paved the way for prosecutors to seek the death penalty if he was found guilty. 36,000 pages of evidence had been gathered and hundreds of witnesses were called to testify, 2 of which were Michelle Murphy and Ashton Kutcher. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Michael Gargiulo. They laid out his patterns of behavior, his past relationships, the fact he was left-handed, the DNA evidence, and where he lived in relation to all the women. The jury then left the courtroom to go and see the apartment buildings and get a clearer idea of just how close Michael was to them, and how easy it would have been for him to see into their homes and keep tabs on them. Michael's defense team, however, raised the fact that no evidence had actually been found in Ashley's home. There was no DNA, no witnesses. It was purely circumstantial evidence, which they argued threw into question the entire trial. Ashley Ellerin's landlord, Mark, then became the defense's focus, and they argued it was entirely possible. After they had slept together that evening, he had killed her. They said this was further corroborated by the fact that when Ashton called her, she told him she was just getting out of the shower, and Mark had already admitted to being there at that time. They said given how she was found, how soon after she got out of the shower she was killed, and the fact that just after 8:30 a neighbor heard something, it put Mark right there at the time, and he was most definitely not in the clear. They also said that the DNA found near Maria Bruno's home was probably because Michael was a repairman at the time. He could have worn a pair of these during a job on the complex and innocently become caught up in the investigation. His lawyer pointed towards her estranged ex-husband and their toxic marriage. The prosecution, however, said that this was nothing more than a desperate attempt to point the finger at innocent people that had already been cleared by police many years ago. Given Michael's obsession with Ashley Ellerin, he was likely watching her bungalow all evening. When he saw Mark leave, he spotted his opportunity and ran over, taking him just seconds. Ashley could have opened the door straight away, thinking it was Mark coming back to get something, and, as it was just a matter of minutes later, she would still be in her robe from the shower. They said the same could be applied to Maria Bruno, and the DNA evidence was clear. As it was in the case of Michelle Murphy, the trial was a grueling one for everybody. Even reporters who were seasoned in these type of cases and knew them pretty well often had to turn their heads away because the evidence was so graphic and gruesome. As everything came to an end, it was now up to the jury. Despite the defense's arguments, Michael Gargiulo was found guilty on all charges, and in late 2019, the jury unanimously reached the conclusion that he should be sentenced to death, believing no other sentence was appropriate. Their recommendation was heard and agreed upon. And in 2021, 45-year-old Michael Gargiulo was sentenced to death for the murders of Ashley Ellerin and Maria Bruno. He is unlikely to be put to death anytime soon, however, as the state of California has not executed anyone since 2006, and Governor Gavin Newsom halted executions for as long as he is in office. But courts have been working on the assumption that executions may one day resume. Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Larry Paul Feidler said, "This case, everywhere that Mr. Gargiulo went, death and destruction followed. Ashley's parents, Maria's ex-husband Irving, and Trisha's family, among others, all gave powerful victims impact statements. All Michael Gargiulo had to say was, 'I'm going to death row wrongfully. I've been framed by tunnel vision detectives.'" Michael will now face extradition to begin trial for Trisha's murder, but this date has not yet been confirmed. Officers from all forces that dealt with this believe that unfortunately there will be more victims out there. During one of Michael's police interviews, he gave several partial confessions alluding to killing at least 10 women, but he refuses to give any further details. The police continue to follow up on leads and tips and hope that a fuller picture will be painted over time and more closure can be found in doing so. They also admit that there were many failings within the investigations and how things were handled. I can't put a happy face on this because we dropped the ball. No ifs, ands or buts about it, said one of the detectives. When asked about the fact that Cook County prosecutors refused to seek an indictment for Trish's murder sooner, another detective said, "I'm not privy to everything they have, but I gotta say, if I'd had evidence like that, you'd bet that the LA District Attorney's office would have had a filing, and these other girls wouldn't be dead. Plain and simple, they wouldn't be dead." For the family and friends that Trisha, Ashley, and Maria left behind, the brutal way in which they were killed will forever haunt them. Vibrant, determined young women, all in exciting new places, their lives so cruelly snatched away in such a frightening way. Trisha's father Rick said, "People talk about closure, but there is no closure. That void is always there." And for Michael's former partners who were subjected to such torment, and Michelle who almost died at his hands, their lives are forever changed as well. Michelle said she dreads going to sleep every night and is equally terrified to wake up. The devastation caused to so many people over those 15 years is unimaginable and unfathomable. It is safe to assume that Michael's crimes would have continued had it not been for his capture. The lengths he had already gone to prove he had no limits and knew no bounds. And it is terrifying to think about what could have happened next and to potentially so many more people. Tara Baker was born on January 20th, 1977, in East Point, Georgia. Her parents divorced when she was young, and sometime later her mother remarried. Tara had 2 brothers and a sister, making her the oldest of 4. From a very young age, Tara showed a keen interest in the legal system and wanted to become either a lawyer or a judge. She would hold trials with her stuffed animals, make legal contracts with her relatives, and often write letters to various politicians. Once, she even wrote to the President of the United States and complained that his speech had interrupted her favorite TV show. After graduating high school, she attended Georgia College. She graduated early in just 3 years, earning 2 bachelor's degrees. In 1999, Tara enrolled at the University of Georgia to complete her education. This university was one of the top law schools in the country and was located in a small town called Athens, just a few hours' drive from her parents' home. So it was the perfect choice for Tara. She didn't want to live in a dorm again after college, so she decided to rent off-campus housing instead. She chose a house split into 3 separate rooms for rent. 2 other university students rented the other rooms, one of whom Tara knew well from college. For some time, Tara worked at a prestigious law firm in downtown Athens, which allowed her not only to cover rent and other expenses, but also to gain valuable experience in her future profession. In January 2001, when Tara was 23 and in her second year, she spent a lot of time studying at the university library. The evening of January 18th was no exception. She, along with her friend, went to the library and spent several hours there. Her friend left for home around 7:30 p.m., while Tara decided to stay longer. At approximately 9:46 p.m., she called her friend from the library to check if she had gotten home safely. Tara also mentioned that she planned to head home in a few minutes. The next day, around 6 p.m., her mother, Virginia Baker, received a phone call. At first, she thought someone was playing a prank on her because the caller identified themselves as a detective and asked if her daughter had ever been arrested, as they needed her fingerprints. Thinking it was a joke, Virginia hung up, but then she decided to call the Athens police station. To her surprise, they confirmed that she had indeed spoken to a real detective and informed her that there had been a fire at Tara's house. Still not fully understanding what was going on, Virginia asked to speak to her daughter. The detective replied that they couldn't find her and that an unidentified body had been found in the house, which was why they needed Tara's fingerprints. The detective further explained that they had only been able to locate one of Tara's roommates, who was not home at the time of the fire. The whereabouts of the other roommate and Tara were still unknown, and investigators believed that the body might belong to one of them. Virginia then asked to describe the room where the body was found. The detective's response left her speechless. They said that the room was filled with antique stuff, and Tara had been collecting such items for years. Tara's family immediately drove to Athens, hoping it was all just a misunderstanding and that Tara was okay. When they arrived at the police station, they were kept waiting for a long time without any information. Several hours later, a detective finally informed them that the body found in the house belonged to Tara and that she had been murdered, not killed in the fire. The detective then said he was too tired to answer their questions. Before leaving, he added that Tara had left them a gift. Under her nails, experts had found fragments of the perpetrator's skin, which might help identify him. Tara's relatives, shocked by the news of her murder, were left in confusion and despair. Despite their pleas for more information, the police did not provide any further details. The family desperately tried to get some answers, but detectives continued to refuse to share any information with them. Since then, the local police department has never contacted the family, and Tara's relatives had to beg for any information by calling and visiting the station over and over again. They eventually managed to piece together some of what had happened. Around 11 a.m. on January 19th, firefighters were called to Tara's address. After extinguishing the fire, they found a body inside, later identified as Tara Baker. Medical experts concluded that Tara had been murdered. Her body showed signs of strangulation and stab wounds, and she had likely been assaulted. The fire had started after her death, leading investigators to believe that the perpetrator set it to destroy evidence. However, Tara's parents were never able to get the police to show them the medical examiner's report or provide detailed information about the murder. Tara's family also learned that many pieces of evidence might have been destroyed by the firefighters, which is not uncommon in such cases. Their primary goal was to extinguish the blaze and potentially rescue any survivors, and they couldn't have known that there was a murder victim inside. The family also discovered that the investigators likely didn't secure the house after finding the body, allowing anyone to approach or even enter the crime scene. As Tara's relatives gathered these pieces of information, they not only encountered the police's reluctance to keep them informed about the investigation, but also faced constant rudeness and unprofessionalism. At one point, they even started recording their conversations with the police and filed complaints against the local investigators. But this led nowhere. They eventually decided to conduct their own investigation and reached out to a well-known criminologist who agreed to help them. However, the local police department agreed to show him the case materials only on the condition that he would not share any information or findings with anyone outside the investigation, including Tara's relatives. The family hadn't been able to obtain Tara's death certificate for 10 years. It was only after writing to the state governor that they finally received the document. But even then, the detailed cause of death was not listed. It simply stated multiple injuries. Despite all this, the police did continue their investigation, although there were many questionable moments in their actions, which we'll discuss a bit later. When firefighters extinguished the blaze and discovered Tara's body, they called the police. Realizing it was a murder, investigators searched for evidence at the crime scene, but the room was severely damaged by fire and water. As the family later found out, some surviving items were never examined for fingerprints. The police were able to determine that Tara's laptop was missing from her room. Considering it was 2001, the laptop was quite a bulky piece of tech, yet no other valuable items were taken. This raised doubts about the robbery gone wrong motive. There were no signs of forced entry, leading investigators to believe that Tara might have known her killer and let them involuntarily. Although the fire and firefighting efforts had damaged the crime scene so much that it was difficult to be certain. Both of Tara's roommates were out of town that evening, so she was home alone. Establishing the time of death was challenging, so medical experts estimated a time frame from 10 p.m., when Tara left the library, to 11 a.m., when neighbors called the fire department. The crime likely occurred closer to the morning hours since the fire didn't need much time to spread. The police also found witnesses who saw a middle-aged white man running down the street that morning. He was only wearing a t-shirt and jeans, which was odd given the fact it was winter. They soon found out about a phone call to Tara's university a few days before the murder. The university had a number for requesting student information, like phone numbers, which was used by students themselves or faculty. A man, sounding heavily intoxicated, called and asked for Tara Baker's phone number. He only managed to write it correctly on the 8th attempt. While this was highly suspicious, the man's identity was never determined. At the time of her murder, Tara had a boyfriend who became a person of interest from the very beginning. He provided an alibi that was confirmed, yet the police were reluctant to remove him from their list of suspects. Even after verifying his alibi, they treated him with suspicion, calling him and his parents in the middle of the night and demanding that he come to the station in another city to provide additional biological samples, answer questions, or undergo a polygraph test. It's worth mentioning that it was Tara's boyfriend who had to identify her. He lived in another city and came to Athens immediately upon hearing about the fire. Although Tara's parents were already in town, the police asked the boyfriend to identify her. They brought him directly to the house, but he wasn't allowed inside. Instead, a police officer went in, took a photograph of the body, and showed it to him on the camera screen. Shocked, he said he couldn't be sure if it was Tara. He then mentioned that he had given her earrings, and if he saw them, he could be certain. The officer went back inside, removed the earrings from the body, and showed them to him. Only after that did the boyfriend confirm they belonged to Tara. The police soon focused their attention on another individual, a student who attended the same classes as Tara and had a troubling reputation. Several female students came forward, saying that he repeatedly asked various girls out on dates and often didn't take no for an answer. He had also asked Tara out multiple times, even though she had been telling him that she had a boyfriend. Some girls also mentioned that this person scared them with his creepy behavior and made them feel uncomfortable. Detectives began to investigate him, but they couldn't find any evidence linking him to the crime. At one point, they even asked Tara's friend to keep an eye on him, which was a quite controversial move, but it led nowhere. Another suspect was an attorney who worked at the same company as Tara. Talking to her colleagues, investigators found out that shortly before the murder, the man began acting quite strangely. In their company, there was a close-knit group of employees who socialized outside of work pretty often. At some point, this attorney suddenly quit their group. Moreover, just a few days before the incident, he told Tara that he wouldn't be able to attend her birthday celebration, which was scheduled for the day after the murder. On the morning of January 19th, before the fire started, one of Tara's colleagues decided to try and convince him to come to the celebration since Tara considered him a good friend, and she was hurt by his sudden decision. The colleague went to his office, but he wasn't there. Considering that his workday had already begun, this was strange. He had always been present at the office in the mornings, but on that particular day, it wasn't the case. The colleague also checked his work schedule, thinking he might have meetings, but it was empty. He didn't show up that day, but the next day he went to another colleague's house and behaved quite strangely. Many people who knew him suspected that he regularly used illicit substances, which could have explained his behavior. But there was more. The colleague noticed several fresh scratches on his neck. As we remember, skin particles from the perpetrator were found under Tara's nails, which meant that she had probably scratched her attacker. The attorney claimed he was scratched by a cat and denied any involvement in Tara's murder. However, when asked who he thought committed the crime, he acted quite oddly. He started shouting that it was her father, but provided no explanation to support this claim. Another weird thing was that the attorney suddenly resigned just a few months after the murder and left the state. It's unknown whether the police compared his DNA with the samples found under the victim's nails. Moreover, for all these years, there has been no information about whether these samples were even examined. Like with all other parts of the investigation, detectives didn't share any information, not even with Tara's relatives. The police later found out that the attorney was secretly dating two female colleagues from the company, despite being married. This could have explained his strange behavior and absence from work without apparent reasons. Both of these women also claimed they were sure he was using illegal substances. The police weren't able to find any evidence linking him to the murder, and eventually they stopped considering him a suspect. Detectives also looked into the employees of the maintenance company associated with the house where Tara rented a room. They had spare keys, which could have explained the absence of signs of forced entry, but they couldn't find any leads there either. Since then, there had been no significant progress in the case. The police continued to search for new suspects and witnesses while keeping most details of the investigation secret, insisting that releasing such information could harm their efforts. Over time, they received several more potential leads. One witness reported seeing an African-American man outside Tara's house a few hours before the fire. Another mentioned seeing blood on a university classmate's notebook shortly after the murder. Police investigated both leads, but they didn't lead anywhere. Tara's parents raised $27,000 and offered it as a reward for any information that could help solve the case. Over the years, almost all detectives working on the case changed. The new team continued their efforts to crack the case, but there were no new breakthroughs. The main issue was the lack of evidence, as the fire and the firefighters' actions destroyed almost everything inside Tara's room that could have been of interest to the investigation. In 2020, 19 years after Tara's murder, a podcast emerged shedding light on her case. Alongside Tara's family and other people involved in the case, this podcast gathered all available information about the crime, sparking a new wave of interest. The police department also took notice of the podcast, leading to increased communication between the new detectives and Tara's family. Thanks to that, the police began working on the case more thoroughly, but there was still no progress. The podcast episodes dedicated to Tara aired for 2 years, significantly impacting the fate of the case. It became one of the reasons why Georgia's government came up with a bill aimed at reducing the number of unsolved cases in the state. This bill was named after Tara and another young woman from Georgia, whose murder remained unsolved. 18-year-old Rhonda Coleman was found dead in 1990, and her killer has not been found to this day. Even though Rhonda's murder was clearly unrelated to Tara's death, it was decided to name this initiative the Coleman-Baker Bill. In 2023, the bill unanimously passed, and the governor of Georgia came to Athens to sign it in the presence of the families of both victims. The law aimed to establish an unsolved cases unit within the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. It also empowered the family of the victims to request the police to review unsolved cases, re-examine evidence, and take other steps to solve them. As soon as the law was signed in 2023, such a unit was established, specifically focusing on Tara's murder. Detectives reviewed all available information and began examining the few pieces of evidence utilizing modern DNA analysis tools. This went on for several months until May 13, 2024, when the police called a press conference. After 23 years since the murder, they announced that the perpetrator had finally been arrested. The culprit turned out to be a 48-year-old man named Edric Faust. During the conference, investigators didn't disclose how exactly they identified the suspect, only mentioning that modern DNA analysis tools and other biological evidence played a crucial role. They refrained from revealing all details to avoid compromising the ongoing legal proceedings, and only at trial would they disclose what evidence they have against Faust. In Faust's arrest documents, among other charges, he was accused of assaulting the victim, so his biological material could have matched the DNA sample from Tara's body. As we also recall, traces of the assailant's skin were found under the victim's nails, and it's possible that modern tools allowed experts to extract the killer's DNA from it. As for Faust, he likely should have been in the FBI database for a long time due to his extensive criminal record, including numerous arrests for various offenses. At the time of Tara's murder, he was 25 and living in the same city. However, police stated they couldn't find any evidence indicating the suspect knew the victim, suggesting Faust might have broken into her home or convinced her to let him in under some pretext. Detectives also revealed that Faust had never been a suspect in the case and only came under their radar a few days before his arrest, thanks to innovative DNA analysis methods. At the moment, Faust remains in jail awaiting trial, and only during the process will we learn what evidence the police were able to find against him. Apparently, detectives did obtain indisputable DNA evidence, as Faust was denied bail. They have no doubt that Faust is responsible for Tara's murder, so her case is officially closed. Tara's family, who fought for the truth for 23 years, finally learned what happened to her and thanked the new team of detectives for bringing closure to the case. As for Rhonda Coleman, the other woman after whom the law was named, her case remains unsolved. However, her family can now hope that detectives will discover new evidence and hold the culprit accountable, as it happened in Tara's case. Let us travel back to October 22, 1984, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the city was left in disbelief as 18-year-old Annette Craver vanished without a trace. The police, determined to unravel the truth, scoured the area, but their efforts were in vain and the whereabouts of the teenage married girl remained a haunting mystery. While the mystery of her disappearance loomed large, the police suspected that it wasn't just a simple disappearing act, but a terrifying case of homicide. This situation was considerably more twisted than initially apparent. A man was at the center of it all, and his twisted mindset would triumph over the quest for justice for an incredible 54 years, until justice finally succeeded. What could have happened to young Annette? Who was this psychopath? And why did it take so long to unravel the truth behind this haunting case? As we delve into this chilling case, we will also lead you through two other haunting mysteries intricately connected to this story. Tulsa, Oklahoma is a captivating city with a unique blend of modernity and tradition. Nestled in the heart of the United States, this metropolis offers a dynamic lifestyle enriched by its diverse cultural scene. Tulsa is renowned for its well-preserved Art Deco architecture, thriving performing arts scene, and mouth-watering Oklahoma-style barbecue joints. Additionally, the city holds fame for its significant history in oil production and proudly stands as the birthplace for the iconic Route 66. Despite its successes, Tulsa has had its struggles with crime. In 2020, the city's violent crime rate surpassed the national average, elevating it to one of the cities with some of the highest crime rates in the U.S. Adding to the city's darker side, Annette Craver's mysterious disappearance also occurred within Tulsa. Born on December 7, 1965, in Houston, Texas, Annette Michelle Craver's early years remained relatively shrouded in mystery. However, a significant turning point occurred when her father tragically lost his life in a car crash in 1979. The heartbreaking event took a toll on Annette's emotional well-being. Her mother, Mary Rose, observed a notable change in Annette's behavior, noting that she grew increasingly withdrawn and often sought solace in solitude. Deep within her heart, Mary held the understanding that her cherished daughter had been grappling with immense difficulties following the loss of her father. On September 8, 1981, a significant event occurred as Mary orchestrated a yard sale in Houston to part with her late husband's belongings. Annette, then 15 years old, actively assisted her mother in the sale. Despite her silence regarding her feelings, it was evident that Annette was far from having moved past the profound loss of her father. But Mary didn't realize that Annette wasn't actually feeling lonely. Unbeknownst to Mary, Annette had been involved with a man whose charm was coupled with a significant age gap. He was not only older than Annette, but even surpassed her mother's age. It was during the yard sale that Mary had her first encounter with Annette's friend, 40-year-old Felix Vale. As he approached Annette to engage in conversation, observing the notable age difference, Mary remained unsuspecting, never entertaining the notion that something more was going on. In the aftermath of Annette's father's demise, Mary grappled with the weight of financial hardships. The task of securing employment in Houston proved elusive, prompting her to consider relocating in pursuit of better opportunities to provide for her daughter. Following a series of challenges, Mary's determination bore fruit as she secured a job offer in the state of Oklahoma. However, a significant concern remained. Annette, who had already missed 2 years of school, was on the verge of graduating high school. Mary understood that relocating abruptly to a different state could jeopardize her daughter's academic process. Faced with this dilemma, Mary opted for a solution. She reached out to a friend seeking assistance in caring for Annette, while she made the move to Oklahoma to secure employment. While the plan initially appeared sound, it soon began to unravel for Mary. As time passed, a growing concern emerged. Annette and Felix's relationship seemed to have intensified in her absence. Mary couldn't shake off her unease as she observed the 40-year-old man becoming increasingly intertwined in her underage daughter's life, a situation that deeply troubled her. After Annette's high school graduation, Mary's diligent savings allowed her to purchase a new house. With the dream of living together once again, she registered the house under both their names. However, upon her return to Houston, Mary discovered that Annette had already left. Dashing her hopes of a long-awaited reunion, Mary learned that when Annette graduated, Felix swiftly proposed a road trip to her, and captivated by his charm, she readily agreed to his proposal. Over time, in 1983, Mary did receive sporadic letters from Annette, each from a different location. Then, one day a call arrived from her daughter, who was then in California. Mary felt a surge of joy hearing from Annette, but the conversation soon took a stressful turn. Annette, who was just 17 back then, sought her mother's approval to marry Felix Vale. Knowing that there was a chance of losing her daughter, who was deeply involved with Felix, Mary struggled with the difficult choice that lay ahead. It was clear that saying no would come with its own consequences, yet arriving at a choice was far from straightforward. With a heavy heart, Mary ultimately made the difficult choice to allow Annette to marry Felix. However, the idyllic married life that Annette had envisioned would soon begin to crumble. Shortly after their marriage, Annette confided in her mother through heartfelt letters. She revealed that Felix had undergone a troubling transformation, turning increasingly controlling. Shockingly, she shared that Felix had even coerced her into undergoing an illegal abortion following her pregnancy with his child. Consumed by fear for her daughter's well-being, Mary implored Annette to return home without delay. Eventually, in 1984, Annette found the courage to break free from Felix's hold and found her way back to her mother. However, upon laying eyes on her daughter, Mary couldn't help but recognize that her beloved daughter had changed. Despite the heartbreak, Mary made attempts to mend the situation with Annette, but her efforts were in vain. Annette remained firmly under Felix's influence, impervious to any other perspective. Thus, with a heavy heart, Mary relinquished her share of the house, gathered her belongings, and moved to California. However, that was not the end of the nightmare. As Annette reached the age of 18, she took a significant step by accessing the inheritance left by her deceased father. Shockingly, she allegedly transferred all the funds into Felix's account, and also transferred ownership of her house to his name. Upon learning of this alarming development, Mary wasted no time and immediately contacted Felix. On October 22, 1984, upon receiving the missing person report, the Tulsa police swiftly approached Felix Vale in an attempt to obtain any possible information. Regrettably, Much like Annette, the police too fell victim to Felix's manipulation. Mary strongly suspected that Felix played a crucial part in Annette's disappearance and was hiding the truth. However, despite her convictions, the police were swayed by Felix's words, leading them to abandon the search for Annette Craver-Vale. Left with no options, the mother found herself in a state of helplessness, clinging to a resolute belief that her daughter would one day return. By 1991, a staggering 7 years had elapsed with no breakthrough in locating Annette. Mary tried to reach out to the police by sending them hundreds of letters, but neither the police nor the FBI was interested in responding to her. Even the letters she sent to Felix were left unanswered. Mary came to the stark realization that relying on others would yield no results. Driven by her determination, she resolved to undertake an investigation on her own. Convinced that Felix held a key to Annette's disappearance, Mary initially attempted to gather information about him through the fledgling resources of the internet. Yet during the 1990s, online information was far from abundant. Through her unwavering research, Mary managed to secure a solitary but significant lead: Felix's sister, Sue Jordan. Fueled by hope and the prospect of uncovering crucial information, Mary embarked on a journey that spanned halfway across the country to meet with her. Armed with this darling revelation, Mary swiftly managed to trace the family of Felix's first wife, Mary Horton Vale, in Louisiana during 1993. Her efforts bore fruit as she successfully located Mary Horton's brother, Will Horton, who had been merely 15 years old at the time of his sister's tragic drowning in the Calcasieu River. During Mary's meeting with Will, he fondly recalled his sister as a kind and virtuous individual, speaking of her in glowing terms. However, the sentiment wasn't reciprocated when it came to his brother-in-law, Felix Vale. Will shared that the Horton family held a distinct resentment towards Felix. Born on February 16, 1940, in Eunice, Louisiana, Mary Elizabeth Horton Vale's roots trace back to the southern state. In 1957, she was crowned a Eunice High School homecoming queen and took on the role of the editor for the school newspaper. Her path crossed with Felix's when she was pursuing her education at McNeese State College in 1960. Remarkably, a mere 6 months after their initial meeting in July 1961, the two exchanged vows in marriage. Their union bore fruit, as in 1961, Mary welcomed a son into the world named Bill Vale. However, Felix had a different opinion. With the arrival of their baby, Felix's demeanor underwent a notable change. Similar to his later behavior with Annette, he adopted a controlling attitude towards his first wife. He even used threats, warning her of severe outcomes if she were to become pregnant again. Despite the warning, Mary Elizabeth Horton Vale found herself pregnant again the following year. The news incited a fierce anger within Felix, prompting her to seek refuge from his rage. Fearing his wrath, she retreated to her mother's home, accompanied by her son, Bill. October 28, 1962, marked a tragic event when Mary Horton and Felix Vale were engaged in fishing along the Calcasieu River. In an unfortunate twist of fate, Mary met her demise by drowning. When questioned by the police, Felix recounted his version of events. "We took the boat from the Calcasieu River near Lake Charles," he stated. While Mary was trawling, she shifted her position in the boat and accidentally fell overboard. However, the Horton family remained skeptical of this account, finding it hard to accept as the truth. Felix swiftly became the prime suspect in the case due to suspicious circumstances surrounding Mary's drowning. The location of her death was not suitable for fishing activities. Her body, discovered 2 days later, underwent an autopsy that revealed telltale signs. Bruising on her neck, right calf, and left leg indicated a possible struggle prior to her immersion in water. Further incriminating evidence emerged as authorities found a scarf wrapped around her neck and placed in her mouth, suggestive of traumatic asphyxia, a form of suffocation. Despite mounting evidence and all the detectives being sure that Felix was the murderer, the coroner had a totally different opinion. He believed that evidence was not enough to convict Felix. Moreover, Felix vehemently denied any guilt. In January 1963, a Calcasieu Parish grand jury failed to indict him, resulting in his release. As Will conveyed this information, breaking down in the process, Mary Rose was further inflamed by what she heard. Now, Mary Rose's pursuit extended beyond seeking justice solely for her daughter, Annette. It encompassed a resolute quest for justice on behalf of Will's sister, Mary Horton, as well. However, before justice could be obtained for the two women, and before the police could be fully engaged, Mary recognized the necessity for more tangible evidence beyond mere statements. Fortunately, she was no longer alone in her battle for justice. Upon understanding the complexities of Annette's story, Will gained a clear understanding of the situation and provided Mary with a particularly intriguing piece of information. Will disclosed to Mary that he had been receiving numerous calls since 1975, inquiring about a girl who had disappeared from Sulphur, Louisiana, in 1973. To compound the eeriness of the situation, the girl in question was none other than Sharon Hensley, who happened to be Felix's girlfriend after Mary Horton. Embarking on a new journey in her quest for information, Mary Rose now set her sights on a different destination. In 1994, she traveled to Bismarck, North Dakota to meet with Brian Hensley, Sharon's brother. Sharon Hensley, born on December 20, 1948, left her home in Bismarck, North Dakota, during the summer of 1970, with dreams of peace and love. She aimed to embrace a new life, joining other free-spirited individuals who were shaping their journey in the wake of the famous Summer of Love. San Francisco beckoned as the ultimate destination for Hensley. She succeeded in reaching her goal. However, the reality that awaited her was a far cry from the picturesque existence she had envisioned in her North Dakota haven. Instead, her path led her to Felixville. During that time, following the passing of his first wife, Felix delved into a hippie lifestyle, embracing a transient existence. He even took on the role of a wandering preacher, and during this phase he established his own personal cult, known as the Holy Order of Mans. It was within this period that 21-year-old Sharon met Felix. 2 years after her departure in 1972, Sharon returned to her parents' home in Bismarck, accompanied by her new boyfriend, Felix Vale. However, something had changed in their daughter. The once energetic girl from North Dakota who enjoyed dancing and spending time with friends now appeared to be distant. Her independence seemed to be eclipsed by her new boyfriend's influence, much to her parents' concern. The meeting left her parents uneasy, but Sharon, being an adult, chose to depart with Felix. She held the autonomy to make her own decisions. Nonetheless, her parents' worries intensified. They held the belief that Felix was leading their daughter into a troubling lifestyle, one marked by drug use and reckless behavior. However, even they couldn't have foreseen what lay ahead in the future. Sharon soon became a member of the Holy Order of Mans, engaging with the group for a brief duration. However, her involvement coincided with a stark shift in circumstances. Felix's behavior underwent a transformation, turning increasingly violent and domineering while his drug consumption escalated progressively. Sharon was on the brink of departing for South America alongside Felix. However, before embarking on this journey, she made a final call to her mother to bid her farewell. Yet, her mother couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that something was amiss. After that last contact, no calls or letters arrived from Sharon. She vanished without a trace in 1973. Felix communicated with Sharon's family through a letter, asserting that he had last seen her in Key West. According to his account, she had left him and set out on a journey with an Australian couple to sail around the world. Yet just as was the recurring theme in all these cases, the Hensley family had doubts regarding everything Felix said. Sharon's family filed a missing persons report in February 1973, but unfortunately the police did not take any action for an entire year. Even though there weren't immediate investigations or initial police support, an old newspaper report filled the gap. The old newspaper report piqued Brian Hensley's interest. The news article was from 1970, about an arrest report of Sharon and Felix. The report stated that a young boy around the age of 8 appeared at the police station, seeking assistance to be taken back to his home. The child turned out to be none other than Bill Vale, the son of Mary Horton and Felix Vale. The police discovered that without the knowledge of the Horton family, Felix had taken Bill with him when he left for California after Mary Horton's death. From that point on, Bill was compelled to accompany his troubled father wherever he went. The police also learned that Bill had suffered from violence during this time, until he managed to run away and find his way to the police station. Felix and Sharon were arrested for child endangerment. However, how the two got free is not known. Upon learning from Sharon's brother, Mary Rose resolved to meet with Bill Vale. She believed that Bill had valuable information about Felix's location, making him a potential source of crucial details. Driven by this intention, Mary embarked on a journey to Kansas to meet with Bill and his family. At first, Bill was hesitant to divulge extensive information, as he feared the sharing details might inadvertently bring Felix closer to his own wife and children. Nevertheless, his desire to assist Mary and secure justice for his mother prevailed. Bill recognized the significance of this opportunity and chose not to let it slip away. Building up some courage, he revealed the hidden secrets that could prove Mary right. Bill recounted a pivotal moment from 1970, just before he fled and reached the police station. He had inadvertently overheard a conversation between his father, Felix, and Sharon. Following the arrest of Sharon and Felix in 1970, Bill found refuge with his grandparents, which marked a significant transformation in his life. Despite this change, his fear of his father persisted, especially as he was compelled to testify against him in court during the trials. This anxiety heightened as he dreaded the possibility of his father's return. And tragically, Felix did reappear. In 1975, Felix came to Bill's residence asserting that he solely wanted to see his son. Bill was gripped by fear, but what made his fear stronger was the absence of Sharon, who was no longer with Felix. Bill grappled with the fear that Felix might inflict harm upon his family if he divulged these revelations. Yet his determination for justice was more powerful. Tragically, Bill's life was cut short by cancer in 2009, preventing him from witnessing the realization of justice for his mother. However, before his passing, Bill took meticulous steps to ensure his account of Felix's confession was documented. He engaged his local preacher to record his narrative, safeguarding the truth for posterity. After years of relentless investigation, Mary finally sensed that she possessed something substantial enough to urge the FBI to reopen the case. Even though she was aware of the absence of concrete physical evidence, she held on to the conviction that the collective testimony of the Hortons, Sharon's brother, Felix's son Bill, and herself could potentially provide the ammunition needed to fight for justice on behalf of her daughter. Tragically, the agent who'd shown belief in Mary's cause was let go due to budget constraints, and the cold case department bore the brunt of the cutbacks. This unfortunate turn of events left no avenue for Mary's request to be pursued. She found herself right back where she started. However, the families who had faith in her knew she would not stop. Meanwhile, Mary's resolve to fight for justice had taken a toll on her over the span of nearly 30 long years, gradually wearing her down. In June 2011, while listening to the radio, Mary learned about an investigator who had successfully resolved 8 murder cases related to the notorious burning Mississippi murders orchestrated by the Ku Klux Klan. These cases had remained unsolved for a half a century until he managed to crack them. Hearing about this gave Mary another push that she needed. Without delay, Mary embarked on a mission to obtain his contact information. Fortunately, she succeeded in locating his number. This individual, a resident of Mississippi, was Jerry Mitchell, and Jerry's answer was simple. After briefing Jerry on the case, Mary discovered that Felix had relocated to Mississippi. Faced with this revelation, Mary confronted a straightforward decision that she needed to make. In 2011, the two of them journeyed to Mississippi and arrived at the pivotal location, a secluded and desolate trailer park. However, 64-year-old Mary was least bothered. All she wanted was to end the chapter of Felix Vale. As Mary emerged from the house, she and Jerry noticed an individual rushing in their direction. Yet it wasn't Felix Vale. Instead, it was his sister, Kay Faulkner. At first, Kay was incensed by their unexpected presence, but her anger quickly subsided upon learning the purpose of Mary and Jerry Mitchell's visit. Recognizing the rapid progress achieved merely a day into the investigation, Jerry Mitchell capitalized on the momentum without delay. He proceeded to interview the Hortons, Hensleys, and Mary Rose, resulting in the publication of a book titled Gone in 2015, a mere 4 years later. This book carefully recorded the stories and experiences of the families. It quickly gained significant praise and received multiple awards. This development caught the attention of the FBI, who, comprehending the intricate details, made the decision to reopen the case. After a prolonged period of struggle, Mary finally experienced a sense of genuine happiness. The FBI meticulously reviewed all available information and opted to prioritize Mary Horton's case primarily because her death was confirmed, unlike Sharon and Annette, whose bodies were never found. However, the challenge lay in the fact that this case dated back around more than 50 years, causing reports and data to be lost over time. Nevertheless, the FBI persisted in their efforts, even as they sought a district attorney willing to tackle this complex and antiquated case. And they finally found the right person for the job. It was Hugh Holland. Hugh Holland wasted no time and swiftly deployed a squad to raid Felix's residence as the initial step. In the journals, Felix described how he even liked to drink raw blood. However, nothing related to the murders was there. Now Holland decided to find someone who would know anything about the Calcasieu incident in 1962, where Mary Horton had drowned. and surprisingly, they found a man. He was 90-year-old Isaac Absher. During their meeting, as Holland conversed with Absher, who was confined to a wheelchair, Absher handed him an envelope. The contents of the envelope turned out to be photographs depicting Mary Horton's body on the day of its discovery, revealing extensive bruising and injuries. Holland took a hold of the photographs and commenced his examination when he finally got the conclusion. Armed with substantial evidence and the necessary proof, Holland swiftly pressed charges against 76-year-old Felix Vale for the murder of his first wife, Mary Horton. In a fitting twist of fate, the very place where the saga had begun, Louisiana, also became the site where it finally reached its conclusion. In 2014, this marked the moment of reckoning as Felix was apprehended and arrested. Throughout the trial, Sharon and Annette's disappearances were also highlighted. Vale was, after all, the last person to see them both. Recognizing the pivotal role of Absher's testimony in the case, Holland requested Absher to provide his testimony, acknowledging its significance as the most crucial piece of evidence in the entire proceedings. Merely 3 months after delivering his testimony, Isaac Absher passed away on May 17, 2014, due to old age at his residence. Nonetheless, his testimony proved to be a decisive factor that dispelled all doubts during the court proceedings. It just took the jury approximately 10 minutes to get the final decision. Felix Vale was found guilty and was sentenced to life imprisonment. While Felix's involvement in Annette's and Sharon's disappearance was not definitively established, Mary and Brian found a sense of peace in the fact that he was held accountable for his actions and finally received the justice he deserved. With Felix incarcerated and justice achieved, Mary's relentless pursuit was vindicated. Nevertheless, the emotional wound in her heart remained unhealed, a reminder of the enduring pain she had endured. Seeking solace from her lingering guilt of having left her daughter due to work, Mary found a coping mechanism in writing letters as though they were intended for Annette to read, with a hope that one day she would finally be able to forgive herself.